The basics first. I'm sure by now all of you know that there were three changes to the structure. One, DLR, the number of questions went on to 22. Obviously, it was 20 last year, and we had 5 sets instead of 4. Uh, we at IMS had an inkling that this might happen, 22 questions and 5 sets. So after the demo test was released, so what we had done was we had released 2 sectional tests in the format. I hope some of you had the chance to solve those and then attempt CAT 24. And the other section change was VRC, there were no parajumbles at all. I think the last time when there was no parajumbles was way back in 2006. So after a good long period, a parajumble disappeared. And the other questions, summary, fill in the blanks, and the odd man out questions increased their weightage. RC remained at 4. And I would say for me, the bigger change, apart from the structural change, was that the reduced difficulty of both the LR section and QA section. So Chintan, Puneet sir, both of them are, I would say, quant and LR experts. Chintan and Puneet sir, you have taken CAT multiple times. So did you both also have had the experience that your attempts in these 2 sections went significantly up in your respective slots?
True, sir, true. So compared to the trauma that CAT 23 was, um, this year's CAT was uh, very easy on the eyes. So at least for the DILR section and quant section, the number of attempts would have decently gone up as compared to what we had in CAT 23. And that would also get reflected in the sectional cutoff that we will witness this year for these 2 sections. Both the sections were easy. And the good thing is that the increase in the number of sets in DI also gave us an additional choice of selection of sets. When we had 4 sets, it was like kind of a make or break situation. You have to try to attempt a set. Which set would that be? Because you did not have so many choices, so it was a less of a chance here. But since we had 5 sets here and the sets were quite easy to select, so that made the thing little easy as far as selection is concerned.
Okay. Okay. And Chintan, by how many did your attempts increase compared to
So
last year?
ideally, I've given the CAT almost 4 to 5 times now, and this year I feel out of all the exams, all the past attempts that I've taken, this year's DLR was the easiest out of all the attempts that I had, including the one that I'd given when I was a student. One thing that personally happened with me was, so today when we started the DLR section, as soon as I started, I saw the first set. It felt easy. I started solving it, and within 6 to 7 minutes, the basic data crunching and the basic data solving was done. And I couldn't believe, like, I had to go back again just to check if I've not made a mistake, because it I wasn't expecting it to be so easy. And somewhere that also reflected, because on an average till now, the attempts that we as mentors had also seen were anywhere around 13 or 14 out of 20. This year I could attempt almost 18 or 19 out of 22, and that does include some calculated guesses. But yeah, definitely the number of attempts were considerably higher even with quants. So quants was definitely easier than last year, but it wasn't as easy. Like, one thing that I felt was that if you chose the correct questions, you could definitely do very well with regards to the quant section, because there were some questions which you could have solved by putting values. There were some questions which you could have done if you knew the basics. There were 2 questions in my attempt. I was in slot 2. There were 2 questions which were absolutely picked and dropped from last year's CAT. So no change in the names, no change in the values. So if you all had solved PYQs, that could have also helped you, and that could have made your attempt even better. So even that is something that could have made a difference. So yes, I did feel that this was something that was a game changer, and definitely the cutoffs will go high.
Great, great. Prasad sir? Yeah.
Hi everyone. So again, the big surprise this year was parajumbles not being there and increasing the number of DLR questions. But yes, compared to whatever past CATs that I've taken, right? And if I look at my performance as well in these tests, I think definitely this year was much easier than last year, right? So people who had taken CAT 23 and maybe you're taking CAT 24 as your second or third attempt, you would have noticed that difference considerably. Of course, people who are taking it for the very first time and who had done, as Chintan also mentioned, right, the past year questions, you also then would have noticed that, okay, it was significantly easier than last year. At the same time, it wasn't like extremely straightforward that, okay, hey, this is what it is, you just do it, right? It's not like that. You still have to, the elements of strategy remain more or less the same. You still follow the ABC methodology, identifying what are the easy questions and doing those first, because there is always that constraint of time, right? So that is why I'm saying it's easier than what it has been in 23, what it was in 23. Very close in terms of so when we look at the 99 percentile mark, right? Past data of CAT, 99 percentile has hovered around 50%, right? So in some years it has been more than that, 55% and so on. In some years it has been on the lower side. So in CAT 23, what happened? Again, it was an aberration. It was just a one-off event where it significantly went down, but now it will go up, right? So obviously, when we look at the percentile cutoffs as well, you will realize that the numbers are on the higher side compared to what they were last year.
Great.
So Hemang sir, I just wanted to add one thing here. So as
Yeah.
Prasad sir rightly mentioned with regards to the choosing the sets correctly, we did get a lot of feedback from the students as well. So I reached my center early to get a view of the first lot as well. And a lot of the students did come and meet us and told us that if like sir, we applied the strategies that you had given us, the ABC strategies in with respect to DLR, with respect to quants as well, and applying the right process ideally was something that made their attempts much more easier, and they were able to improve their attempts. So like finding the battles to fight, if people chose them correctly, it was definitely something that benefited them. So yeah, absolutely, like you had to choose the correct questions, and that would have definitely resulted in you getting a higher score, especially with DI, because like two and a half sets, three sets was something that a lot of people were coming and telling us, "Ki, sir, we've done two, we've done three." So we can definitely see the cutoffs going higher.
Great. Okay, let's go to the other sections now, section-wise analysis. So I'm presenting slot verbal for all the three slots. So Puneet sir had slot 1, Chintan had slot 2, and Prasad sir and I both had slot 3. Um, Obviously, this is a consolidated view of all the students we have spoken to and the mentors who have taken the test. More than 30 odd mentors from IMS across multiple cities have taken the test today. So this is a consolidated view. Obviously, maybe our individual preference might slightly differ here. Now, Prasad sir, is my screen moving? Yeah, perfect. So yeah, coming to slot 1, Puneet sir. So what we have done here is we have arranged all the four RCs from in the increasing order of difficulty. So this is what we felt was the consensus. Do you agree with this, Puneet sir? I know even though quant and DLR is your forte,
Yeah.
but you can still comment on verbal here.
Yeah, so as we have seen, the surprise for this section was the jumbled part in the RCs and the VA questions, which is, I think, students should have been flexible enough to look at the changes that one needs to make in the strategy and all. With regard to the four RC sets that we had in this slot, I would agree that this is the correct difficulty level we have with the four sets. The the last two RC passages that we have mentioned here, the bandicoots and the economics fall apart. It was not very difficult to read, but why are we categorizing this as medium difficulty level is because the options were very close. Two of the options were very close, and there were a lot of critical reasoning concepts that were involved in these two RC passages, which made these two RC passages little on the difficult side. But otherwise, readability was fair enough, and the first two RC passages were quite doable. The questions were also quite straightforward, so the categorization is perfect here.
So talking about slot 2, ideally, I would say like in terms of readability, in terms of solving the RCs, again, being a quant mentor, I can only comment about the ease that I felt in terms of solving the RCs. So yeah, I do believe that the order is correct in terms of the reading of the RCs, in terms of the difficulty of the RCs. But one thing that stood out with this particular order was, so spice trade set. So luckily the RC that I had as the first RC was also spice trade. I read through it and I did feel that okay, it was an easy one, but the only problem was the questions were very close. Like you couldn't really make out. So in the analysis of slot 2 also that we've done, Ashish sir has specifically mentioned about that RC. So a lot of the people would have been confused, and therefore, out of the four questions that you had in the spice trade question, a couple of questions you could have easily let go of just to avoid a negative. So that was the only outlier, because that being the easiest in terms of reading was the toughest in terms of the questions. But other than that, all the other RCs in terms of the difficulty level are perfectly mapped. And a lot of the people would have maybe wanted to go for the carnivore human conflict. But I feel that is something that I would have avoided. I solved that at the last. I exactly solved it in this order. And yeah, I do believe that the carnivore human conflict question, like the set would have been at the last, because the questions were easy, but the reading part was slightly more tedious. So, basis that, yes, this order is absolutely perfect for slot two.
Yeah. Uh, for slot three, I think yes, the Chinese liquor brand was quite simple. Personally, I also found the languages passage to be simpler. I found the contamination of space to be the most difficult passage, because compared to the other three, it was a slightly more difficult read. And also the options were quite close. So, in my personal opinion, I would have taken contamination of space as the fourth RC. But broadly, the other three were very, very similar. The need to regulate AI, I thought was an easy read because it is very much similar to what's being discussed around. So if you are just not living under a rock, you would have gathered what's being discussed in the passage quite easily. Maybe one off question just required here to read the nuances. So overall, all the four passages I would say were easy to read. The options, at least one question in each of the four RCs, I thought had close options, particularly the one on contamination of space. So yes, I think most people who, let's say, targeting that 98, 99 percentile mark could have done all the four passages, maybe not do a couple of questions here and there, but yes, all four were quite doable, I would say, this year. Prasad sir, what about you in slot three? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I started, in fact, with the need to regulate AI, because I really like reading about AI and technology in general. So I initially started with just browsing what were the topics of the RCs, and there was a temptation to start with the contamination one, but I was like, okay, let me start with the need to regulate AI, closer to my heart. So I started reading that, did that. The second RC that I did was the liquor one, which again, as others have also mentioned, that it was easy. Then I did the language one, and contamination was the last one that I kept. Now, what I did towards the end was I didn't have a lot of time, so I just marked two questions out of the four questions, and I ran out of time. So that was the only RC that I felt that it was the more difficult one. So, in personal view, the need to regulate AI was easy. Then second would be languages, third would be liquor, and the most difficult of the lot would be the contamination one. Though again, it's a very subjective assessment, right? So a lot of people would say that contamination was easy. Somebody will say it was more difficult. So that is fine.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, overall, it was like a decent set of
Yeah.
RC, I would say.
Yeah. And see, overall, I think verbal was the one section out of all three that was closest to what we have seen in CAT 23. So I don't think so. The cutoff for verbal would be very, very different as compared to what happened last year. Yes, obviously, slot one students had a slight surprise where, not a slight, they actually had a surprise where there were no parajumbles. So, yes, for slot one, maybe they took time to adjust to the new reality of no parajumbles. But otherwise, I would say verbal is one section where the cutoffs and the score versus percentile table will be very close to what happened last year. It would be in a +2, -2 kind of a range. That's my estimate for the verbal section, I would say, etc. Right. Yeah, let's move on to the next section.
Puneet sir, we'll start with
Yeah.
you for slot one of
Yeah.
DLR.
Right. So for the slot one section, the DLR sets, as we discussed, were on the doable lines. The most easiest set was the candlestick pattern on the stock price and all. Even if you're not aware of how it happens in the actual stock market scenario, it would not take much time for you to grasp the explanation about the candlestick pattern that they have explained. So this was quite doable set. A straightforward DI set, we know that DI generally is not deceptive and should be your first attempt choice. So that is what we would have ideally started with. Another interesting thing about this set was the data was very simple to calculate. It was not some numbers which had a lot of calculations involved. All the numbers were multiples of 100. So it was definitely one set that all of you should have targeted. Again, another set that you all should have targeted is the distribution set that we had of web surfers and 30 stars being distributed. So this was also a very doable set, not much of information, very easy to get the answers. There was just one question out of this entire set which had the two possibilities that we would have for the two guys, C and D. Otherwise, it was a straightforward set, sheer short attempt. This also should have been by most of you. The remaining three sets were on the medium category, where the third set, if we talk about the countries and distribution and all, this involved some basic concept of Venn diagram. Using that would have made it easier for you to complete this set. Tournaments. Now, actually, if someone has the fear of tournaments, they would have found this set to be a little difficult because you generally do not solve questions on tournaments on a regular basis. But surprisingly, there was not much of data involved. It was straightforward mapping of the teams with one another and going through the questions. Now, the fifth set, which we categorize as difficult, predominantly because of the length of the set, too much of data. If you would have tried attempting this set, you would have understood that this set is not not a set that we should have touched upon. But yes, giving the feedback which students have given me after the first slot, they said that even though this set was difficult to read and all, but later on, if you spend 2 to 3 minutes in this set, this was not that difficult or challenging at all. But having said that, it obviously will not be the first choice in a selection of sets. The order in which we have mentioned here is what you should have ideally gone with. And the interesting part was, unlike the previous few years, where selection of sets may become difficult because judgment errors may happen, here it was straightforward observation which you would have been able to gauge which set is difficult and which set is not. That would be for slot 1.
Okay, coming to slot 2, I would say with regards to the 5 sets that we had, I would just flip the first 2 because ratings of the product was a pretty straightforward set. It only and only required the concept of averages. So if y'all were good with averages and the numbers were straightforward, it wasn't something which was out of the ordinary. So ratings of the product, I would say, was the easiest out of them all. But ideally, the first 6 firms with their profitability, with their PAT, with their ES, with the PRD, it was pretty straightforward. You had 2 graphs and you just had to make sense of the 2 graphs, and you could have done that absolutely within the first 6 to 7 minutes. So 6 firms with profitability, ratings of a product, and rating of 8 gymnasts, each could have been done in like 8 to 9 minutes ideally. And that would have left you for the last 2 sets with almost 12 minutes in hand. If, again, that being said, if you've chosen the sets correctly. With regards to lakes in a gated community, I particularly felt that it was slightly tricky. And I feel I also need to mention that in this particular set, there was one question where we had 2 options with the same value. So that was the first question of the set where there were 4 options and out of which 2 were same. So that is something that happened in this set. But irrespective, the questions were straightforward because there were only 2 MCQ questions and the other 3 were Theta. So, like it was a double-edged sword. It could have gone either ways. Since you just had to count where all the person was going to be moving, and you had to read the questions carefully because in some places it was you cannot go on the same road again, and in some cases it was you can't go to the same point again. So that was something that just needed to be kept in mind. Otherwise, it was basic counting and Pythagoras, and then 10 numbers in a grid. So, with regards to picking and choosing, what I would suggest or what I felt was that if the students successfully picked up the ratings of a product and the 6 firms with profitability set, they looked easy in terms of solving and they were easy with regards to questions. They could have easily gotten their 8 marks then and 8 questions then and there. After that, they could have gone for either lakes or either rating of 8 gymnasts. Or if let's say they do not have time, they could have still picked up a couple of low-hanging fruits from the rating of 8 gymnasts and 10 numbers in a grid. Because one question that I remember at the top of my head is for the rating of 8 gymnasts, they had specifically mentioned in the conditions that the trainer Z cannot have or only has odd number. And the first question was how many students did Z train, and three of the options had the number 2 in it. So you could have absolutely eliminated that and gotten the answer right away. So there were some low hanging fruits as well. And that is how maybe by solving two sets, they could have gotten a couple of questions from the other two and gotten their attempts to 10 to 12. So more or less the order looks correct. The first three were definitely the ones that you should have attempted, and you could have then looked for some low hanging fruits from the others. So that's about DLR. But yeah, that
Okay.
absolutely one of the easiest DLR sections that I've
Yeah.
come across in the last attempt.
Yeah, before Prasad sir speaks on slot three, people who are attending the session on YouTube, you can just mention your slot and the number of genuine attempts you had in DLR, so that will help us also understand the opinion of all the students. So just mention, let's say S1 and the number of genuine attempts you had in the DLR section, right? So that all of us can also understand your number of attempts. Yeah, Prasad sir.
Yeah. So slot 3 again, as we have seen in slot 1 and slot 2 also, right? Definitely much easier compared to what we have seen previously. Now, with regards to the choice of sets, definitely app subscription was the easiest. But again, I met a few students after the test and they said that some of them didn't choose app subscription. And see, this can always happen, right? Because sometimes you take these decisions based on gut feeling. A lot of times that science that you have learned that, okay, this is how I'm supposed to select the set, you may or may not be able to apply that as it is, right? So you sometimes go with the gut feel and all of that. Even on first reading, if something looked very difficult, maybe people would have stayed away from that. So personally, I was not able to do the room temperature question, and that was more of a function of the choices that I made. Right. So a lot of people said that room temperature was easy and it was doable and all of that. Uh, because I had chosen the other sets, I could not spend enough time on room temperature, and ultimately I ran out of time. So I started with app subscription, which I felt was the easiest. In fact, if somebody is good with numbers, I think within 5 minutes you could have answered that complete set, right? It wasn't that difficult. But then from there on, of course, making choices as to which one you really want to do, right? So for some reason, I felt, okay, let me do the GDP of 10 countries one. But then even there were a lot of calculations involved. Luckily, if you realize that, okay, there are some questions wherein instead of calculating for all eight countries, you have to calculate only for 4 countries because those are the ones that are shown in the option. So you calculate only that much and not the entire thing, because otherwise that would have been a massive waste of time. Then I did the network of roads and ATMs, which a lot of people found difficult, but it was similar to some of the sets that we have seen on the CAT previously. So it wasn't very, very difficult. You had to work out a few cases. So I think there were more than one case for that, which I was able to write. And then from there on, I took a few half chances here and there because there was no point writing more cases. So I felt that, okay, I think I got fair cases and I just went with that. Proteins, carbohydrates was the next one that I liked for some reason, which I should not have done. So I went with my gut feel that, okay, proteins, carbs will be very nice and interesting to do because it was multiples of 5 and multiples of 4. But then I realized that there's a little bit of critical thinking that you have to do and to arrive at all the questions correct, right? So ultimately ran out of time. So I would say, depending on, again, your understanding, you could have chosen the sets. Proteins, carbs, I would in fact put it as a difficult one because I solved it and then I realized that it isn't as straightforward as it seems, right? Even network of roads and ATM. So I think looking at what a lot of students said that room temperature was easy. I would say the 3 doable sets then should have been app subscription, room temperature, and GDP of 10 countries. Whereas the moderate ones would have been proteins, carbs, and network of roads and ATMs.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
but otherwise, yeah, I mean, very interesting because at least you could do something this year, right? Unlike some of the previous years where people were struggling to identify that one set. Uh, Initially, 7-8 minutes were gone, used to be in that only, that, okay, let me identify that set. But here, at least you could identify it fairly easily that, okay, there's very limited information to work with in most cases. and then you just have to your rough sheet and right? That's what it is. So it wasn't very, very difficult, I would say. So a decently prepared candidate, somebody who is aiming for a 99 percentile, with 3 sets, you would reach there, is what we are estimating.
Correct. So I could, Prasad sir, I attempted DLR after a very long time, so I was out of touch. But yes, app subscription was, I think, a very, very straightforward set. The numbers are also very beautiful, everything fit very easily. Proteins, carbohydrates, I think some of the questions were very straightforward. I think one or two just were on mere observation because you could just look at M1 and get that answer. One or two required a lot of calculation that you are mentioning. So, and GDP of the 10 countries also, I think a couple of questions were quite direct. Mere observation was required. Um, uh, and room temperature one, I thought was a little different, so I didn't really attempt it. And network of roads, yeah. So I would put app subscription, proteins, and GDP to be the top 3 sets. But I think students found room temperature also straightforward. And network of roads, I think, was clearly one set which could have been your fourth or fifth set to be attempted. Definitely not the top 3, I would say.
Yeah, so talking about the quant section.
Yeah, Puneet sir.
Yeah. So talking about the quant section, I think this is where most of the students would have been happy about compared to what we had in the last year. Last year, good number of questions from arithmetic were still there as we have here. So like this year, last year also we had arithmetic and algebra put together are about 15 to 16, 17 questions. But unfortunately, last year, the section that students attacked the most, which is arithmetic, had extremely difficult and lengthy questions, which was the relief this year. Out of the 8 questions that you can see in the arithmetic section, slot 1, about 3 to 4 questions were something that you could classify as category A, according to what we do at IMS. So category A questions were about 3 to 4 of them. Some of the questions were very straightforward. In fact, there are a couple of questions that we got in slot 1 which were directly picked up from the questions were exactly the same that we have in our catapult classes. Like for example, the question that we had where 3 were removed after half, 3 extra were given to the friend. So this type of question we have in our linear equation topic. We also have in the teaser question. So very straightforward questions from allegations and mixtures as well. Another thing that uh, should the student should note is that when they come to us before the CAT exam, which topics to focus upon, which chapter should we do, which chapter we should not do. This is a great learning experience. You had 1 or 2 questions from each and every topics distributed across. You had questions from percentage, profit loss, SICI, averages, mixes, allegations, 1 question from time and work, 1 from time and distance, 1 question from numbers as well. There are many students who leave numbers. So we had a very straightforward question on remainder theorem. Just 1 or 2 questions from geometry, 1 question from functions, 1 question from graph, 1 question from log. So very well distributed across the all the topics. The students who have gone through these topics covered the basic levels and gone through the study materials that we have provided them. About 6 to 7 questions were somewhat which all of you should have got right because they were on the easier side. So overall, if I have to summarize, out of the 22 questions that we had in the quant section, about 7 to 9 questions were A category questions, about 10 of them were B category questions, and about 5 or 6 of them were C category questions. If you would have just attempted the A category questions, or 8 or 9 of these questions, and say got 6 right, you would be fairly close to clearing the cutoff. So this was a completely doable section, as relatively easy. It was not a very easy section, by the way. What we are talking about here, what all of us are talking about here, is predominantly in comparison with last year's paper. So with respect to the last year's paper, this year quant was easy on the eyes, and 6, 7, 8 questions right is something that a student with decent amount of preparation should have gotten there. Yeah.
Okay. So coming to slot 2, I would say, as Puneet sir rightly mentioned, slot 2 ideally tested your versatility because there were questions from topics where like your basics were tested in arithmetic. Again, arithmetic being the dominant section, we had 8-ish questions from there, and these questions were all from all across the board. We had questions on time, and there was only one question on time and work, which was fairly doable. There were two questions on TSD. One was easy, one was difficult. There was a question on ratios. There was question on ages, averages, etc. Profit and loss. Two questions from profit and loss, and that was arithmetic. Arithmetic out of eight, I would say around five were doable. Then we had algebra. Algebra had a couple of questions which are pretty direct, and then there were a couple of questions where your identities knowledge was tested. Then coming to modern math, there was one question on pathways, and there was a question on sequence series. Again, infinite series, direct question. You could have just approximated the value, played around with the options, and you could have absolutely been on your way. Next, there were three on geometry and three from numbers. So from numbers, what I felt was there was a question on logs. There was a very simple question on remainder theorem as well. And I would say that if you chose the correct questions, you would have done very well with regards to your quants. But that being said, I felt that from what we heard from the mentors, from what we heard from the students, slot 2 was slightly more trickier than slot 1. Not in terms of the difficulty of the questions, but maybe in terms of the length of the questions, because the questions were slightly more verbose. The questions were slightly more longer. And therefore, you all had to be very careful. But yeah, that being said, there were two caveats. There were two things that would have helped you absolutely in acing the section. One thing was, if you were good with putting the values from the options and getting the answers, it would have helped you in almost 2 to 3 questions. And the second thing for slot 2 that I would say is there were two questions which were directly picked and dropped from CAT 2023. One was from CAT 2023 slot 1, one was from CAT 2023 slot 3, I suppose. And both these questions had no change in the values, no change in the names. So if you remember them well, those were 6 marks handed to you on a plate. And if not, at the time, you could have still solved one question, the SICI question that we had. And there was one more question, which at the time to solve would have been very tedious, and therefore it was a type C. All in all, to summarize, I would say out of 22 questions, around 6 to 7 questions were a safe A. And I'm saying safe A because people would have felt कि नहीं sir, हमारे लिए 8 or 9 थे. But I felt 6 or 7 were easy to spot, were easy to solve, and you could have done that. Then there were almost 10 questions or so, which were type B. And the remaining 6-ish questions were type C. So a fair split, but yeah, I feel you could have you could have one of marks being normalized up if at all that is happening. But yeah, all in all, it was better than last year. So people coming in with the trauma of 2023 would have definitely liked this year's QA section.
Yeah, coming to slot 3 QA, again, as Chintan rightly mentioned, right, the trauma of 23, and everybody who had either taken 23, as in actually taken 23, or maybe done the past year questions, you would have been very happy with what you saw today, right? Because pretty much all the questions were at least something where you could read and understand what is going on. Unlike last year, where unnecessarily there were complexities in the questions, right? Combining concepts from different topics like progressions and logarithms, right? This year that didn't happen. So the questions were direct. But yes, questions weren't very, very straightforward. Questions weren't very easy. So you still will have to think a little bit, right? So there were some questions where you could have used a calculator. There were some questions where you could have applied some shortcut. But then again, a lot of shortcuts is afterthought, right? While you're solving it, the shortcuts don't come naturally to you. Right? So even for example, the question on median, there was a question, right? That basically the total area is given. You have to do 1/4 of that to find for that central triangle. So for a lot of people, that may not come naturally, right? So you'll have to maybe do a bit of calculation here and there to arrive at the answer. The only advantage that I think that people in slot 2 and slot 3 had, especially the ones who entered after watching review of slot 1, was knowing what kind of questions were there. For example, if you look at the question which said something like 52 plus something root 5, right? That was a question in slot 3, I guess, wherein similar question was there in slot 1, right? If you look at the question on remainder, right? So similar question was there in slot 1. So if you had gone with that thing that, okay, I've seen the analysis of slot 1, in fact, this year it would have been very useful. Rather than, so previously what we used to say is don't look at the analysis if you're going to get worried and all of that. In fact, this year, if you had seen the analysis, you would have been in a slightly better position. because you had some gap, especially people in slot 3 who saw slot 1 analysis. You had some gap wherein, let's say, if you're not done remainders, you could have quickly looked at, okay, how do you calculate remainders? And just understand that there is a cyclicity of remainder. That is the concept that was tested. Then for that question which I just mentioned about 52 plus whatever root 5, in that one also there is a concept from algebra that is tested. So you have to equate 2ab to that and a square plus b square equal to the rational part of it, right? So that advantage, I think some people in slot 3 would have taken. Speaking objectively of the difficulty, it was possible to identify and clearly segregate between easy, moderate, difficult questions. Either you know it or you don't. It was that kind of a thing. So for example, there was a question on functions. Now, if you're done functions, enter it. If you haven't done functions, don't enter it. It was that kind of a thing. You have done time and work, enter that question. If you don't know time and work, don't enter the question. It was as straightforward as that. But yes, some questions demanded you to do a lot of calculations. And even after trying a few things, you are hitting a dead end in some cases, which happened with me in a couple of questions. But I was like, okay, I mean, whatever, as long as you're able to identify at least the doable ones and do them correctly, you would get to a reasonably good score. So we are seeing somewhere around 12 questions. If you are able to identify and do all of them correctly, that would definitely be a 99 percentile, right? So roughly in that ballpark is what we are looking at. So yeah, for a 99 percentile, I think 12 should be doable, because I looked at a lot of questions where on the first glance, maybe you will skip them. You look at the questions and feel like, oh, let me not get into this. But on second reading, it seems doable. So a nice strategy was to not sit on a question for a very long time and decide that, okay, am I doing it or am I doing it for later? Which is again that ABC classification that we say, right? So if you had executed that properly, you would have been in a position to identify at least, I would say, 7 to 8 questions for sure, unlike last year, where even reaching 12 correct questions or reaching an attempt of 12 was a struggle. So this year, a lot of people have attempted more than 12. That's what we spoke to a lot of students and gathered from that. But even 7 to 8 attempts, right, is a decent attempt. I would say if you have got everything correct, right? So that's where we are with respect to the QA difficulty.
I think I have just two comments. One, a lot of people on YouTube, the self-proclaimed gurus, were commenting that if right before CAT, that this time IMC is setting the paper, so quant would be very very difficult. So and we have always maintained that the institute that has the conveyor does not matter. The sectional difficult does not depend on that. So this time we have proved right, and we are very happy about it. And second, I'm a non-quant person, but I think there were some 6, 7 questions where absolute basic question that, anybody who has taken a fair shot at CAT, would have done. For example, that mixtures, compound interest, a couple of questions on profit and loss, So even if somebody had done the very basics, for the critical modules, I think they would still be able to attempt a good 6, 8 questions. Like Puneet sir mentioned, there were so many A's and B's. So at least it gave a good opportunity even for people who don't find quant to be the natural strength to do well and get that 20 to 25 marks in the quant section also, I would say. Yeah. Yeah, moving on to our overall estimates for the score versus percentile. This is what we have maintained throughout the day. We have not made any changes to the same. So quickly, yes, a couple of disclaimers here. One, because the DLR difficulty has changed significantly compared to the last couple of years. So this involves a fair bit of guesswork from our side, that if a student at 99 percentile could attempt X questions last year, what would he attempt this year? All of us, I am sure, unanimously agree that the number of attempts will go up, at least by anywhere between 25 to 40%, depending upon the percentile and the capability of the student. And the same goes for quant, I would say, so for quant, we have taken a reference of CAT 21 because internally that's what we found that it is the closest representation. For verbal, our estimate is very, very close to what we had for last year. So combining these three, I think this is our overall estimates. Obviously, I don't take any B-school application decisions, any life death situations. Don't get too happy, too depressed looking at these numbers. We will come up with a revised estimate. Once the response sheet is out, we'll be collecting the response sheets. All our math whiz will run their formulae, and then we'll have quite a refined estimate of the percentiles. So we'll share our initial estimate and the revised estimate at that point of time. As of now, this is just to calm your nerves from now till the response sheet is out. Broadly, this work. Hence we have mentioned a range and not an accurate number. Right? Yeah, Prasad sir, you can comment on the numbers if you want to.
So, see, again, I said in my slot 3 analysis as well that no matter what we say, right, with respect to score versus percentile, either it's going to make a lot of people happy or it will make a lot of people sad, right? And people will have their view on, oh no, this is not looking right, or this should be higher, that should be lower, and all of that. See, everybody puts some thought into it, and collectively we think, okay, these are the numbers that are looking good. But yes, as Hemang sir mentioned, right, that once the response sheet is out, that is the only time when somebody can actually say that, okay, this is what it is looking like. And even then, even after that, right, there are a lot of changes that happen. Because see, you don't know everything, right? You don't have all the variables of this equation and say, okay, this is how I can predict it. And predictions is always a tricky game to do. So that is why, as Hemang sir also mentioned, don't take any life decisions based on this. See, because these are just for you to make a sense of where you might lie at this point of time. Things can always change a little bit here and there, and you have to account for that, right? So if, let's say, basis analysis, you think that, okay, I'm possibly looking at a 98 percentile, right? While making applications, you have to also account that, okay, I might get a 99 also, I might get a 97 also, right? So keep that as a thought process, that let me account for a plus minus here and there. The other thing is, these are all initial estimates, and generally people who like to talk about their scores are the ones who have done well, right? So that is why there is also that factor. There is that halo effect that happens because some people have done very, very well, so they'll come out and say, okay, it was very, very easy. But then if it's not that if one person finds it easy, it was actually easy, right? Because when you look at a collective audience who is taking the test, and because of that, of course, percentile itself is a concept which is relative. So have you done relatively better to others? That's all that matters. Score, the cutoffs will go up for sure in terms of the raw score that is required to hit a particular percentile, but that doesn't impact the actual institute cutoffs this time too much, because the number of applicants has also remained more or less the same. So now, if the actual number of takers, once the authority releases that number, if that is very close to what it was last year, then even the institute cutoff will not change much, which will in fact be a good thing for us, so that we can nicely predict, okay, whether you can get a particular institute or not. So that's the other thing that I wanted to add about percentile. One last piece would be, no matter what has happened today, right, you still have a lot of other tests, right? So this is not the end of it. Some of you may not have done as per your expectations. I would say the only thing that you can now focus on is the other tests that are out there, right? So take a break tonight, have a nice dinner, relax a little bit, maybe watch a movie or something. But tomorrow, open your book and figure out what went wrong and what are the topics that you need to work on for the other tests that are upcoming, right? Because you have MyCat, SNAP, NMAT, ZAT. The race has just started, right? This is not the end of it.
Yeah, so thank you all of you for joining us. Maybe you can also put your comments on what do you think of the percentage, especially people who have taken CAT last year, and you know your score percentile last year. So you'll also know how many increased attempts you had this year, which will help us refine our judgments throughout. I was just checking last year 99 percentile for slot 1 was at a raw score of about 77 odd. So roughly it is going up by 20 marks, which means approximately 7 net answers, right? Most of that obviously coming through DLR and quant. So at that higher numbers, it looks to be reasonable when we just do a basic check on the data. So yes, the cutoffs will be on the higher side. A lot of people may not like that, but the fact is a lot of people have increased attempts. I was checking the comments on your DLR attempts, so that have gone up significantly as the average compared to last year. So yes, slightly high scoring match this time as compared to previous, and maybe very close to what happened. India Australia first innings very low score, and suddenly innings two was a very high scoring affair. So similarly, yeah, Cat 24 is a high scoring affair compared to Cat 23. Uh, so I hope at the end of the day, people have put in the efforts. I hope most of you are happy that you could do justice to your efforts that you had put in, and take a break as Prasad sir mentioned. Come back refreshed, because the season has just yet started. There are a lot of other tests, NMAT, SNAP, ZAT, so many other tests, and obviously a lot of you will also have to prepare for GDPI. So take a well-deserved short break. Don't make the break too long, and then we'll be with you all through the entire exams, all through the entire year. And we'll keep catching you for live analysis session for the other tests also. So I wish you all the best for your upcoming tests. And good evening, good night. See you soon. Thank you, Chintan, Puneet, Prasad sir. I hope all of us had a great time talking to each
Yes,
other.
absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and all the best to all the students. Bye.